Hi everyone. I hope everyone is well. We're going to start today with obviously this second lockdown and how it's affecting people in regards to the property market and what our views on the property market going forward is going to be. So we'll give everyone another sort of 30 seconds or so to join, and then we'll start. So I think there's a few people still coming on, but we'll make a start, guys. So thanks for attending this month's webinar. It'll be the last of the year. I'm sure everyone's looking forward to a nice break, despite the amount of lockdowns that we've had. So one of the questions that we get asked a lot is every time something happens out of the norm, such as a lockdown, we always get asked, well, how is it going to affect the property market? Now, back in March, April time, when the initial lockdown took place in the UK, we did feel that it wasn't going to have an impact at all. We just felt there was going to be a lot of pent up demand. Now, that might seem all well and good us saying that in hindsight, but we did a webinar at the time stating that. That's for everyone to see on the internet. It's on our website. So we just felt that actually none of the fundamentals have changed. One thing that we did say in that particular webinar is we think one lockdown is harmless. We think two lockdowns could have an impact. So when they started to announce the tiers initially, and then this particular lockdown, so it did cause a little bit of concern. We thought, well, in regards to the actual lockdown, what's it going to do? Are people going to give up looking? So, for example, my initial concern was when you've got someone who has had a lot of pent up demand, or an industry, you've got a lot of pent up demand, and then you're refrained from buying, and then you're allowed to buy it, then everyone goes to buy it, and then suddenly there's another issue causing people to refrain from buying. Some people give up, and then what happens is, does the market die a death? However, it's been really different on this lockdown, and one reason why we're going to give a resounding no, we don't think the second lockdown is going to affect it. However, there are going to be other impacts that come down the line, which I'm going to summarise in this call as well. But one reason why we don't feel that this lockdown will affect it at all is it feels different to the first initial lockdown. Whereas the first lockdown felt actually no one was going out. And I don't know if anyone did go out at that time in terms of just literally walking the streets or driving. A journey that typically takes me 15, 20 minutes to get into my local town centre on a Saturday, I was doing in two. There was literally no one around. The whole of the city centre where I live was absolutely dead. Driving into London from where I am to Canary Wharf, it normally takes me sort of 50, 55 minutes, and it was taking me 35. So it was a huge change. That initial lockdown felt like a lockdown, but this lockdown has felt slightly different. Kids are at school, so for me, doing school runs in the morning feels no different. Roads are still busy, people are still going into work, coffee shops, takeaways, all open. Whereas I think with the first lockdown, no one knew what the rules and regulations were. People now know what the rules and regulations are. They know the loopholes, so they get around them. And I think there's also a decent chunk of people who have actually given up. They actually don't care about the lockdown. Also, solicitors are more organised. So whereas the estate agency as an industry, it was closed for the first lockdown. No one knew if they could open, if they could do viewings, if they couldn't. There's been guidance this time. So the actual industry said, well, look, we can carry on as normal. We can do viewings as long as we have practicalities in place. For example, gloves, masks. We have to leave all doors open. We have to leave all lights on. The public coming in can't touch the door handles, can't touch the switches, sanitize. So everyone knows where they stand. And another big impact why we feel that this lockdown isn't going to make a difference at all is because lawyers, where they were at the time, they suddenly had to have a big fundamental shift from working in the office where all the paperwork was to working at home. So we spoke to solicitors, and sometimes they were on paper runs. They were literally driving from home to the office, pick up paperwork, driving back. whereas now they've got more around them at home, so they know exactly what to do. So in regards to that, we feel that the second lockdown isn't going to have that kind of impact. But we are going to talk about other impacts. So how a lockdown will affect the market indirectly by obviously redundancies that we know are going to take place. We'll come on to that part after. But in terms of the best areas, so we've seen sort of a lot of news reports in regards to the best areas where to invest in. We've seen newspaper reports saying everyone's getting out of the city centre and they're moving into things in the suburbs and houses with gardens. It's not quite like that. Whereas typically, if you had something where someone would buy a property which is on the outskirts of a city centre, and they can now afford to go and buy a property on the suburb because they don't need to go on to work, then yes, we are seeing that. But directly in the city centre, where we're seeing typically you have more of a rental market directly in the city centre. So the majority of the owners are non-owner occupiers. They buy to rent out. So if we go into central London, the majority of people who live in central London, especially in the city part and the working part, that they won't actually be owners. They're renters. Canary Wharf, the majority of people who live in Canary Wharf are renting. They don't own. So we don't actually see too much of a dramatic change there. The same is happening in Manchester and Liverpool. Where we do see a difference, so let's go back to London, is on the outskirts of London. You've got places like, for example, West Ham, Stratford, Barking, people who would typically buy to live there and commute into the city. We're obviously now seeing changes there where they're actually buying further outside. But it's not like the papers report where there's a mass exodus. What you've got to look at as well is if people are buying because they want gardens and they want outdoor space because they've got children, well, those children are in a school. You can't just up and leave and go half an hour away, because then you've still got to take your children into your local school. So it's not like the papers read there's suddenly this mass exodus going on the suburbs. It's just not like that at all. There's so many things to think about as well. Is what happens when the work, these offices do take people back. Now, whilst I don't think they're going to take people back like before, I think we are going to see going forward a lot of people working from home. What happens when the offices do reopen up, which they will? The reality is people like working from home for a short period. Then the novelty wears off and people want to get out and have some communication with the outside world. So when people go back to the offices, well, what happens then? They don't just set up and move back into the city. So we're not actually seeing as much of a mass exodus as these newspapers are reporting. So where do you purchase? Inner cities or outside city centres? Well, for me, it's always been inner cities. I've had properties outside of city centres before. We've advised on on properties outside of city centres, but our figures and our data tells us that the best yields and the best growth are always city centres. You look back to when the market was in the doldrums back in 08, 09. If you could have bought anywhere in the world, you would have bought in city centres. If you would have bought in London, Paris, Berlin, wherever it may be, those are the markets that have recovered the quickest and would have given the best yields if you would have bought at that time. Of course, now they're so expensive that the yields have dramatically decreased. Also, what you've got to look at is when people purchase outside of city centres, they typically buy. Because you get cheaper property, you get more bang for your buck, so to speak, they will typically buy. So the rental demand on the outskirts of city centres is a lot lower than it is in the city centres itself. Then we come on to the fact that, do we have to buy something that's completed to benefit from the stamp duty holiday? Well, look, unless you're buying something right at that top end, at the 500,000 mark, which is the where the stamp duty holiday peters off. But if you're buying 500,000, give or take, and you're saving 15,000, of course, it's worth doing. It's worth getting it over the line. But when you're coming down to what we feel are the best properties to rent, whether that be the 200,000 or 250,000 and less, give or take, you're saving 1,500. It's not the be all and end all. It's not something that we're saying you have to buy something now to get it completed for before March to benefit from that stamp duty. Of course, every little helps. That £1,500 to £2,000 saving is something that you can obviously benefit from, and it pays your legal fees, or it might pay your mortgage fees. But the reality is, it's in the whole scheme of things, if you're buying a £200,000 investment, 1,500 here or there isn't going to make a dramatic bit of difference. So it's not about buying something for the sake of buying something. It's about buying something that gives you the best return over a 5-year plus period. There's no point in aiming for something that, you know, you save £1,500 on now, but actually go forward 5 years, it doesn't add up to be a great investment. So we always say to people, make sure it's a good 5-year plan, or we just don't look at it. Don't buy something for 6 months, a year, think, oh, it's great now, but don't worry down the line. It needs to be good for 5 years. If it's not good for 5 years, then I wouldn't be looking at it at all. Do we hold off investing until we see what the results of the vaccine are? Again, there's merit for that. You could do, but the reality is that people still need to live. People still need to live in a house or live in a flat. So the bottom line is that if you hold off, then nothing's going to change. Again, people have done that. I've seen it before. People held off on the stock market. Oh, I'm going to wait until the election's over. Or I'll wait until Brexit's done. I'll wait until the Brexit deal's signed. I'll wait until COVID is done. And the reality is that at every point, everyone who waits typically misses out. The stock market went down to sort of like late 4,900 odd points. Pretty sure that the majority of people that are on the call now didn't get in at that point, even though in hindsight it would have been a great time to get in. And again, the property market, I'm pretty sure the majority of people didn't get in 08, 09 and 2010, even though in hindsight that's been a great time to get in. So no, I'm not one for holding off. I'm always one for thinking, you know, where is the best place to put your money right now? If you have money in a savings account and it's performing poorly, you need to move it. Doesn't matter whether the property market might drift down the line, and we're going to come to that in a minute. It doesn't matter whether the property market might drift. The reality is, if you're getting a decent return and you're not looking to sell now, the property market, it can fluctuate all over the place as far as you're concerned. As long as your return whilst you're holding that property is stable, that's all you need. When it comes to sell, of course, that's when we want the market to tick up. So that's why we say to people, look, 5-year plans plus is the key. Now, as we then come on, we're looking at obviously what's going to happen next. We're looking at the reports. The reports that were published previously back in March, April, May time is horrendous when you think about actually the reality of what happened. So we had obviously the Independent said UK house prices, they're braced for a slump as the housing market reopens during coronavirus knockdown. Bloomberg, they were said that the UK property could slump 12% on the pandemic impact. That was from Aviva. And then This Is Money had estate agents saying that property price is going to fall 7%, while the Bank of England predicted a 16% decline. Now, that's pretty, 16% decline, and it couldn't have been any further from the truth. This is the Bank of England. This is someone or an entity that's meant to be the leading light when it comes to the economy, and they're predicting a 16% decline when actually last month we hit an all-time high. So, and a lot of people say, oh well, it's been because of the stamp duty, but the reality is they're not saving a dramatic amount. Like I said at the beginning of the chat, for 1,500 or 2,000 pound saving, it's not that dramatic enough to light the torch paper under the property market. Yes, it gives it a nudge, but we're not talking about 20, 30, 40,000 pound savings here. We're talking a handful of thousand. So in regards to say it's going to decline 16%, that's absolutely horrendous. Of course, what the Bank of England will then do is there will definitely be a report within the next 6 months saying what they did staved off the 16% decline. We see it all the time. They did the same with Brexit. So that's what they reported before. Again, what we always say is every single webinar we say the same thing: the fundamentals, the legislation, the actual interest rates which are passed on as mortgage rates, and taxation. If they don't change, typically we don't see a dramatic change in the property price. However, one thing that we do need to look at is confidence, because the reality is when it comes to confidence, that's where people spend their money. What a lot of people sort of think about is that actually, well, if there's a recession, that means there's less money around. There's not less money around, there's less money being spent. So the reality is there's a finite amount of money in the country. We've just seen the Bank of England print another 150 billion, I think it was. But there's a finite amount of money. And of course, what the governments rely on is the circulation of that money to go round. And of course, taxes get paid and income is made, therefore income tax or VAT, whatever it may be. So the reality is when that money's going around that things are working. Inflation is also a good thing. There's certain countries which don't have inflation. If you look at Japan, they're savers. Again, they can't get out of the rut. When we look at certain countries that have hyperinflation or inflation which is out of control, that's bad. But inflation is needed to push things forward, but as long as it's under control. But things that affect that are confidence. So when you have a lot of negative talk about recessions, and we sort of see this morning, obviously Debenhams have got into administration, then you've got the Arcadia Group. Then of course things change dramatically, and potentially people keep their money in their pocket, which is not what's needed. So in regards to the property market, if people start to keep their money, if there's a lack of confidence, people start to keep their money in their pockets and not spending, especially over times like Christmas and New Year, where typically restaurants and the leisure industry is booming, and of course retail is booming as well. If people don't spend their money during this time, then of course that could have a negative impact. Now, how that affects the property market is the people that would typically benefit from the retail and benefit from the leisure industry, whether that be your waiters, your baristas, things like that. They're the people that would be employed, and they'd be your first time buyers. And it typically takes your first time buyers to punch into the market to send everything up in the growth side of things. However, maybe growth will settle down, and it has to. We can't keep going up. It has to settle down. But if you've got first-time buyers not buying, they're renting. So that's where we feel that there's going to be pressure on the property market when it comes to the rental side, but maybe not the growth. We feel that 2020 has been a great year for property in terms of its growth. We feel that the start of next year, the first 6 months of next year, we should see a real nice bit of growth as well in the next 6 months. And then we see it evening out. We certainly don't see crashes. We certainly don't see anything like we were going to see in 2008, 2009, 10, because the fact that the interest rates are pretty much locked in. So we're not going to see people where they're giving back their keys because they can't afford their mortgage anymore. Most people have a fixed mortgage, and if they don't, they can always go and fix it at a pretty much record low rate at the moment. But if first-time buyers, the baristas, the waitresses, waiters, and anything like that, who are just struggling to maybe get on that market because the property prices are pretty chunky, then they will rent. People don't want to live at home, especially a young couple. They want to move out, and they will typically go and rent first of all. And that's where we feel that we've still got, as long as you're buying in the right locations and the city centres, that's where we still feel that we've got great demand on the rental properties. We're still renting out properties across sort of Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds, Sheffield, and there's still that demand there. So in terms of, let's say, coming back to whether you should invest now, again, like I said, we've seen a number of people over the last sort of 20 years since I started working in the city. I've worked in two major industries. The first is the financial investment industry with stocks and shares, and the other is property. And I remember a broker telling me in my early days, he said, look, forget about trying to guess the market. You're not going to get in at the bottom, and you're never going to get out the top. Forget how good you are. It's just not going to happen. Just gauge whether it's the right thing to do with your money at that one point in time, and then look at it for, as I say, 5, 10 years. He always used to say a decade. He said, if you don't like it for a decade, you don't like it for 10 minutes. I'm pretty sure he got that from a Warren Buffett quote, but the reality is it was true what he said. If it's no good for 10 years, then forget about looking at it. We're not trying to buy at the bottom and getting out the top. We're just trying to make sure that our money is increasing better than we can do in a savings account, or better than we can do elsewhere. Property is a slower moving juggernaut. And over the last 30 years, yes, we've seen dips, but we are much higher today than we were in previous years. So the answer is, should you be investing now? The reality is, you keep 5 or 10 years, it will still be higher again. That's just the nature of the beast. The property market will continue to, like an oil tanker, continue to move forward. When it turns, okay, we'll see the dips in the late 80s, early 90s, and 2008, 9, 10. But the reality is now is that we're still ahead of the curve. So if you are in a savings account making minimal money, the answer is pretty much, yeah, you should still be looking to invest. Even if you don't invest in property, we're not saying that property is the only way forward. There are a number of different developments, vehicles, I should say, where to put your money. We obviously feel that property is far more beneficial because we feel it's more secure. It doesn't dip like the stock market does. But then you could say at the same time, the negative is it doesn't jump like the stock market does either. But we feel for a long-term plan and a long-term sort of, like I say, 5-10 years plus with regular income, you can't sort of go too far wrong with the property market. So in terms of going back to the lockdown, no, we don't feel the lockdown will affect it at all. We do feel that there's going to be really good growth over the next sort of 6-7 months or so leading up to sort of summer next year. I do then feel that the growth will teeter off slightly. We cannot keep going up and setting record highs all the time. But I feel that we will still be edging upwards, but we will not going to be edging upwards in the same vein that we've seen over the last sort of few months or so. There are still bargains to be had. It's all about making sure that you've got the right income coming in, because as long as your income's secure, you can have no problem at all with the next 3, 5, 10 years plus, great income coming in. And then, of course, importantly, after that, then if you do go to sell and we're 5-10 years down the line, we fully expect it to be far higher than it is now. So in terms of, like I say, just to summarize, guys, lockdown, no issue at all. Doesn't even feel like a lockdown for the majority of people, I'm sure. Things are still taking place as normal. People are still going out to work. Roads are still busy. So for me, there's no direct impact of the lockdown. It's the indirect impact that once we start to see sort of a number of these businesses, like we see the retail, go out of business. And again, let's be realistic. COVID or no COVID, was Debenhams really one of those at the forefront of people's minds when they went shopping? There's a Debenhams in my city centre, and it was always dead even prior to COVID. So these things don't surprise me. I think COVID was probably just the final nail in the coffin, if honest. But the reality is it's probably only going to go in one direction anyway. However, moving forward, it's those kind of people that work there who potentially will be your potential first-time buyers. So if there's a drift in that market, that might have a knock-on effect up the scale. But then, of course, they do need renters. And if people don't have that secure job and they might go back to doing part-time or temping, something like that, we will typically then find that the rental market has a lot more pressure on it. During a recession or any kind of drawback, it's the rental market that has the most amount of pressure, which is great for landlords such as yourself. So on the left or somewhere, guys, there's a question mark or a speech bubble. Feel free to ask any questions. Also, one important thing that we've got coming up as well, which we will have before Christmas, the webinar on St Anne's. So if any of you have purchased or are interested in the St Anne's development in Liverpool, we've got a webinar that's being recorded. Hopefully it'll be this week. We understand that everyone can't attend, so the way we're going to do it is everyone's asked questions on that development. Feel free to email in. We're going to put those questions to the developers, and then we're going to send that particular webinar around to everyone. So we've got a couple of questions started already. In regards to city centres, are there discounts to be had despite the market going up? Yeah, there are. What we're typically finding is that the discounts are coming from developers selling, not individuals. Individuals want the best price for their property as they can, and they're actually going over the top and overpricing. Whereas developers, if they've got a large portfolio, they're thinking, well, actually, they could probably take a 5-10% hit. They built theirs or bought theirs back in 2010, 2011, 2012, whenever it may be. So they've had a good run on it anyway. So from their side, it's a win-win. The clients who are buying are getting for a good discount, and the developer who's selling, they've made their money since 2010. They're happy to sell, even though it is slightly below market value. So yes, there are still deals to be had, but typically it's through the developers, not through the individuals. In regards to Liverpool, what would you say is the difference between Liverpool and Manchester? Typically, Liverpool's slightly behind the curve. It's one that we get asked all the time, and we've got two of us in the office who have different opinions, mine and Jack. So I'm a big Manchester fan. I think Liverpool's great, but I'm a big Manchester fan. I feel that the city can withstand negative pressure better than Liverpool can, whereas Jack's in the Liverpool camp, and he just feels that the income and the growth is better in Liverpool. So it depends where you're at. What I would typically say is if you're looking at a 20-30 year plan, then you're probably going to get maybe something better in Liverpool because you've got the more income there. But if you're looking at things like maybe 3 to 5 years or 5 to 7 years, and you just want as much best income as you can despite what's happening in the market, Manchester for me seems a bit of a surer bet, but there's pretty much of a muchness. Next question: how about London? Are there discounts to be had there? Again, yes, there are from developers, but still not to the point of where we're seeing them so squeezed that it's worth doing. Now, this might sound quite a lot of money as a discount, but there are some developments out there which I had the privilege of looking at back in 09-10 when they were sort of 600-700 grand price, and they were giving up to 200,000 off. Now that is a huge discount. So once we get to that stage, of course, it's going to be worth dipping back in. Now I don't think we're anywhere near that stage yet, but I do feel we could be close to the stage of picking up some bargains in London, and especially where we've got some developers who maybe have just bitten off more than they can chew. So that's what we look at in London. There's a couple of developers I'm speaking to at the moment where I feel that they have bitten off maybe a little bit more than they can chew in terms of 2 developments. They're coming up to finish 1. They're ready to start the 2nd. They want to start it ASAP. If it's a good market, then they start sooner rather than later. They can then get selling sooner rather than later. So they might be willing to take discounts, and that's in like a zone 4. So something like that might be worth looking at, which we're just going through the due diligence at the moment. In terms of the second lockdown, it's another question here. In terms of the second lockdown, why don't you think it will have the same amount of impact as the first? I think multiple reasons, as I mentioned, is first of all, lawyers are already in a position where they can sort of do exchanges and completions. Secondly, the industry is open. The estate agencies are open. They're doing viewings, whereas in the first they weren't. And people just seem to be a little less concerned about the virus in this lockdown than they were in the first lockdown. Whereas the first, it was like everything had been shut, the streets had shut. Now people are still out shopping, things are still relatively busy despite it being a lockdown. In regards to city centre over properties outside the city centre, do you not think people want outside space? Yeah, go back to the first lockdown, and of course it was sunny, right? So everyone wanted outdoor space. If you were stuck indoors when you had 25, 26 degree heat, 1,000,000% people were thinking they wanted an outside space. Now, when it's 9 degrees outside, people aren't overly interested. And the fact that people are saying actually they want spaces, but during winter they're not actually overly interested. And I think another important factor is that the second lockdown, because people are now going out on the second lockdown, most people don't have that same sort of cabin fever that they did. Ratner, you've just put your hand up to ask something, but it might be better if you type it out, because I don't know if I can get audio coming from you on this one. Got here. Would you recommend buying zones 1 to 3 in London when prices are higher and rental may be tougher as rental charges are higher? Let me sort of reread that. Would you recommend buying in zones 1 to 3 in London when prices are higher and rental may be tougher as rental charges is higher? No. Why would you buy in London? I certainly wouldn't be buying in London with high prices and tough rentals. Forget where, doesn't matter anywhere. I wouldn't be buying at peak prices where you're struggling to get rentals, certainly not. Before I bought anything in London, you would have to really heavily discount the price for me to venture back into London. And no, certainly not. I would also look at that rental market. I wouldn't fancy buying something in a 30, 40 story tower, for example, in London, where that suddenly comes onto the market and you've got chunky prices, coupled with the fact that you've got another sort of 300-400 units to rent all at the same time. No, I wouldn't feel comfortable with that at all. Something where you might have 11 to 15 units in a zone 3 or maybe even a zone 4, then yes, I would. But again, it does depend on the price as well. What about buying a buy-to-let flat in Birmingham? Yeah, Birmingham's good. My only concern with Birmingham is we meet a lot up there with certain councillors. It depends on the area. Birmingham isn't like the Manchester's where you've got this city centre and it expands out. It seems to be scattered. Obviously, we've got the Jewellery Quarter, we've got the main station, New Street, but there's a couple of areas, Digbeth, where we've got a couple of really good developments there. Things like that, then yes, I would. But also look at how many are coming on the market at the same time. That's key as well. So again, some people say, oh, well, it doesn't matter how many are coming on the same market at the same time because I've got a guaranteed rental. Again, the problem is with some guaranteed rentals is then you can't get a mortgage with them because some lenders don't like it. So you're narrowing your market all the time. And at the moment, what you want to be doing is expanding your buy-to-let lender market because some lenders are becoming a lot stricter. So just make sure that where you're buying, as I say, I'm more than happy to have a look at the actual project for you. We've got a couple of projects there. We've got East Green, and we've got another one, Equipoint. We've got another one that's being launched over the next sort of week or so. We feel quite comfortable with the area that it's being in and the price point. So, so yes, Birmingham's a really good city for buy-to-lets. There's a few little caveats to that, but I'm more than happy to discuss that in more detail. All right, guys. Well, look, I'm going to type in my email address here, just in case you don't get it. As I say, when I end this webinar, it will shut off. So I've sent you my email address. If anyone wants to ask any questions specifically to me, more than happy to answer any time. But as far as I'm concerned, we will have another webinar in regards to the St Anne's. But if I don't speak to you, I hope you have a good rest of the year and a fantastic festive season and new year. And I look forward to speaking to you all in the new year. Take care.